he crushed Nobunaga's greatest ally. He was advancing on Kyoto, nothing in his way. Then, in 1573, the Tiger of Kai was gone. Was it illness? What killed Takeda Shingen may have changed Japan forever. He crushed the strongest ally Nobunaga had. He was 3 months from Kyoto, with nothing left in his way. Then, in 1573, the Tiger of Kai simply stopped. What killed Takeda Shingen? Takeda Shingen was not a man who inherited power. He seized it. Born in 1521, he expelled his own father from Kai province in 1541 and took command at 19. What followed was 30 years of methodical construction, a spy network, an agricultural system that turned mountain farmers into soldiers, a cavalry force that no army in Japan could match. His banner, Furin Kazan, swift as wind, silent as forest, fierce as fire, immovable as mountain, was not a slogan. It was a statement of fact. By 1572, he was 50 years old and had never been defeated in the field. For over a decade, the only man who could match him was Uesugi Kenshin, and even their 5 battles at Kawanakajima produced no decisive winner. Shingen was not a man who fought for honor or glory. He fought to win, and winning meant patience. While Kenshin charged, Shingen calculated. While Kenshin was an untouchable god of war, Shingen was building something more durable. A domain so well administered, an army so well trained, that time itself was his ally. All he needed was the right moment. In 1572, that moment arrived. In October 1572, Shingen launched the campaign that was intended to end Oda Nobunaga. He had spent years constructing the conditions for it, an alliance with Kenyo Honganji, the great Buddhist fortress complex that was already fighting Nobunaga from the west, and an agreement with Asakura Yoshikage pressing from the north. Nobunaga suddenly faced enemies on 3 fronts simultaneously. His position, which had seemed unassailable, became dangerously exposed. And marching out of the mountains from the east, with 30,000 men, came the Tiger of Kai. Tokugawa Ieyasu, Nobunaga's key ally in the east, stood directly in Shingen's path. He garrisoned Hamamatsu Castle and watched the Takeda army overwhelm everything around him. Then, Ieyasu made a critical decision. He sallied out of his castle to meet Shingen on the plain of Mikatagahara. He had 11,000 men. Shingen had 30,000. On January 25th, 1573, the two forces met. What followed was not a battle. It was an annihilation. Ieyasu fled. The battle lasted hours. His army was shattered, his generals killed or scattered, and he barely reached Hamamatsu Castle alive. According to later accounts, he was so terrified that he soiled himself on the retreat, a story his own retainers deliberately spread to make it seem like cool indifference rather than panic. Shingen could have pursued and destroyed Hamamatsu entirely. He chose not to. He had larger objectives. The army moved west.
In Kyoto, Nobunaga's letters to his allies grew increasingly urgent. The path was open.
In February of 1573, Shingen's army reached Noda Castle in Mikawa province, a small Tokugawa fortress whose garrison refused to surrender. While the siege settled into a waiting game, something unexpected happened one night. A musician inside the castle played a flute, a haunting, beautiful melody drifting out through the darkness over the battlefield. According to one of Japan's most persistent legends, Shingen emerged from his command tent and sat in the open night air to listen. A marksman inside the castle took aim through the palisade wall. The shot found him. The sniper theory has persisted for 4 centuries. The marksman's name appears in some records as Suwa Koshiro, an expert rifleman using an arquebus who spotted the Takeda commander silhouetted against lantern light through a gap in the castle wall. The shot was not immediately fatal. Shingen withdrew northward. His generals were told he was merely ill. Messengers carrying news of the campaign went silent. But historians who have examined contemporary records note a critical problem. No source written at the time of the siege mentions an assassination attempt. The story appears only in documents written decades later. The illness theory is better supported by the evidence. Shingen had been unwell for months before the Western campaign began. The campaign itself moved more slowly than his previous operations, unusually slow for a commander renowned for speed. Contemporary accounts record symptoms consistent with a serious internal condition: difficulty breathing, persistent coughing, exhaustion. Modern medical historians have suggested esophageal cancer, stomach cancer, or tuberculosis as likely diagnoses. The picture that emerges is of a man already dying, who pushed himself into one final campaign, and whose body gave out at Noda, not because of a bullet, but because it had nothing left. Takeda Shingen died on May 13th, 1573. He was 51 years old. On his deathbed, he reportedly told his generals, "Conceal my death. Do not mourn. Continue as though I still live." The order was obeyed. His body was transported northward in absolute secrecy, sealed inside a palanquin. The army withdrew from Mikawa without engaging Nobunaga's forces. Enemies and allies alike were confused. For months, it was unclear whether Shingen was dead, gravely ill, or simply repositioning. The greatest secret of the Sengoku period had begun, and it was being kept perfectly. Takeda Katsuyori inherited his father's domain, his father's army, and his father's unfinished war. He was a different kind of man. Shingen had been patient, strategic, and willing to retreat when the odds were wrong. Katsuyori was aggressive, proud, and deeply conscious of living in his legendary father's shadow. He needed a victory of his own to establish his authority over generals who had followed Shingen for 30 years. 2 years after Shingen's death, that opportunity arrived. He would take it. And in taking it, he would destroy everything his father had built. June 1575. The Battle of Nagashino. Katsuyori led the famous Takeda cavalry in a direct charge against Nobunaga's prepared defensive positions. Nobunaga had spent the intervening years preparing specifically for this moment. Thousands of arquebusiers arranged behind wooden palisades, firing in coordinated volleys. The cavalry that had dominated Japanese warfare for 3 decades rode directly into massed gunfire. The Takeda lost their greatest surviving generals in a single afternoon. The army Shingen had spent 30 years building was shattered in hours. It never recovered. 7 years later, in 1582, Oda Nobunaga launched the final campaign to destroy the Takeda entirely. The clan that had once threatened to end him collapsed within weeks. Its allies abandoned it. Its generals surrendered or fled. Katsuyori died in the mountains, deserted by the last of his men. Nobunaga celebrated in a manner that shocked even his own generals. A banquet at which the skulls of Shingen and Katsuyori were put on display, lacquered in gold and silver. It was a final, deliberate act of desecration, the price of having been, for a brief moment, the man most likely to stop him. The counterfactual question haunts every history of the period. In early 1573, Nobunaga's position was genuinely desperate. The Honganji held him from the west. The Asakura pressed from the north. Shingen advanced from the east. Nobunaga's surviving letters from this period reveal something unusual for this normally unshakable warlord: fear. He wrote urgently to allies, to the Portuguese Jesuits in Japan, seeking reassurance and support. His position was close to untenable. 1 more month of campaigning, perhaps 2, and Shingen would have been in reach of Kyoto. If Shingen had reached Kyoto in 1573, Japanese history diverges entirely. Nobunaga's unification project ends. The firearms revolution he was driving stalls. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who served under Nobunaga, disappears from history. Tokugawa Ieyasu survives as a subordinate power at best. The Japan of the Edo period, 2.5 centuries of Tokugawa peace, never happens. Instead, a Takeda-dominated Japan, built on cavalry doctrine and strategic patience, facing a completely different future. All of this hung on what happened at Noda Castle in the spring of 1573, in the darkness, by a palisade wall. Shingen himself was a man of extraordinary and disturbing contradictions. He expelled his own father. He ordered the execution of a son. He broke alliances when it suited him, and honored others with perfect reliability, on terms that only he understood. He spent his entire life building toward one objective, and died 1 campaign short of it. In Japanese cultural memory, he occupies a specific position: the ideal strategic commander, never defeated in the field, betrayed only by time. His domain of Kai was, by the standards of the era, one of the best governed in Japan. His people called him their father. The cause of Shingen's death has never been definitively established. The sniper theory persists, because it is dramatic, and because it was never conclusively disproven. The illness theory is better supported by the available evidence and more consistent with the timeline of his deterioration. Both remain theories. What is beyond dispute? He died in May 1573, at 51, at the worst possible moment for his enemies and the best possible moment for Nobunaga. Whether it was an arquebus ball or a failing body, the effect was identical. The Tiger of Kai fell silent, and Japan's future was written without him. Kōfu, the capital of Shingen's domain, still honors him. A large bronze statue stands outside Kōfu Station. The Tiger of Kai, in full armor, war fan raised, looking west toward the Kyoto he never reached. Every spring, the Shingen-ko festival fills the streets of Kōfu with thousands of participants in period dress, the war drums, the cavalry, the Furin-kazan banners. No warlord in Japan is celebrated with more consistent civic devotion. He failed to unify Japan. He never reached Kyoto. And yet, the city he built still carries his name and still marches in his memory 500 years later. Next time on Samurai Chronicles, the weapon that made Takeda Shingen the most feared commander in Japan. A cavalry force so devastating that no army could stop it in the open field. Until Nagashino. The mounted shock troops that terrified a nation, and the tactics that finally ended them. Coming next. Takeda Shingen, the Tiger of Kai. Dead at 51 in the spring of 1573, with Kyoto within reach and Nobunaga at his mercy. The mystery of how he died is, in the end, less important than the fact of it. He did not reach Kyoto. The campaign he had spent 3 years building was never finished. And in the vacuum left by the Tiger of Kai, a different Japan took shape, unified by men who came after him, built on foundations he never laid, under banners that were not his. He came closer than anyone to stopping what followed. It was not close enough.